I want to welcome a friend of mine, Mr. Matt Ludwig, who spoke at one of our events in Santa Monica last year and had one of the presentations that got the highest reviews at our survey afterwards. And so I'm really looking forward to what he has to say to all of you. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Matt Ludwig to talk a little bit more about AMP and the mobile web.
Thank you, Tyler. I'm a little bummed that you didn't actually attempt a magic trick this time. I was kind of looking forward to it after last time. Thank you all for having me back. As you mentioned, this is my second time at Pubtelligence, so very excited to be here in my home office, home city. Last time I was, as you mentioned, in Santa Monica, so kind of farther away. Actually very excited to have everybody here where I spend most of my time. I'm here to talk about AMP and the web. Some of you may have heard some of the things that I've said before, but I think by the very nature of the fact that I am still here, I guess maybe like 6-ish months later, means that there's still work to do on the web, and AMP as a potential solution is not going away, and we continue at Google at least to be one of the companies who is investing and supporting this as an open source technology. So. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. So as Tyler mentioned, I'm Matt. I'm based here in New York. My primary focus, if you were to kind of describe it overall, is to really make the web fast and user first. And at the moment, that kind of takes shape through really promoting what we believe the AMP project has to offer. But at the end of the day, again, my focus really is on kind of the user experience and making sure that the web is great. So all things under that kind of bucket are things that are very interesting to me. So with that said, let's talk about the web. So hopefully everybody here has a website or is related in some way. And it's possible that you also have apps. Apps are great, but I think the web is truly unique, and it's important, actually, nice timing with the birthday, anniversary, whatever you want to call it, of the web, to talk about really the important value that it brings, both in terms of your ability to actually publish content, but just the unique sense of something that you can create with really no restrictions. And in a weird way, like, it's totally endless. So I use this like slightly cheesy stock slide because you can adjust and add ingredients and build things on the web completely how you choose. And everybody here probably has a good sense of this, but I think it's really worth reminding ourselves that you don't have to play by any rules necessarily. It's really up to kind of how you want to build your website, which is awesome. And I can remember back in the days of whether it's GeoCities or MySpace, people would want to add little custom codes to their site to add music in the background or different things, and you could kind of build whatever. And that still is true today, and it's important, even in the context of kind of things expanding and getting more complex, reminding ourselves that everyone here owns their site and can make the changes that they see fit. That all said, it is important to note that because you can do everything doesn't mean you should do everything. So some of you may have seen this if you've seen some of my talks before. It's actually one of my favorite examples to use, so I continue to use it. This is a real site, funny enough. But obviously there's a lot going on here. And while it might be kind of like novel or funny at first, and potentially it is working for them in that way, I personally would not want to return here to continue to use it for buying a car, I suppose is what they do. It's actually even hard to tell. So I use this as an example, again, because just because you can do something on the web doesn't mean you really ought to. And it's kind of this delicate balance of making sure that you are meeting users' expectations and really providing your readers or your visitors with value, but not over-indexing on all the crazy things you can do just because you feel like you want to add some whiz-bang things to your page. So underlying that kind of like intuitive principle is data on the importance of speed and user experience. Some of you probably feel like I'm beating you over the head with these stats because I know at Google we go back to these often, but it really does bear repeating because I think sometimes people forget, or it's very easy to get sidetracked about, well, if we just make these changes and it maybe adds a little bit of performance delay to our site, but we'll get through. And the problem is when those decisions compound, then you actually do end up with some problematic situations. So I won't necessarily even run through all of these sites, or these stats rather, but you can see that people really don't like slow sites. And the kind of flip side of this is that you actually can make more money or drive more subscriptions, or if you're in the e-commerce business or selling products, like drive more conversions in that sense if you have a faster site. It's really easy to objectively measure the speed of a site, or relatively easy. You can apply some science to it. But there's also studies that I don't cite here that talk about the general user experience as well. Speed is like one aspect of that, and I think oftentimes that's what AMP, which I will talk about in a second, kind of anchors on. But it's really important to just consider the entire experience, and it's speed is an important factor, but it's really everything going in involved here. So let's talk about measuring that. Like I said, you can objectively measure these things. So I want to point out, this is some data from the HTTP archive, which is publicly available for anybody to check out. And this is basically the amount of data that has to be pulled down on, I believe it's the medians that they list at the top, yes, to sites both on mobile and desktop over time. And so this has been going on for a number of years, that they've been kind of indexing this over time. The main takeaway here is that it's not getting any better in terms of the amount of data that actually people are requiring users to transmit either to their mobile device, especially, or their desktop to load their website. And the thing that is important here is that while, yes, it is true that technology is getting better, mobile phones are more capable, 5G is coming potentially, these things are rising in parallel, and ultimately it's very easy to get it out of whack where there's too much and it becomes slow. So I think it's some people, because they tell me afterwards, like, oh, well, aren't technologies keeping up with our ability to actually like deliver all this data? And it's true to a certain extent, but it's really important to note that like every single month it is continuing to go up. So I just pulled this. This is the most recent snapshot. It goes up until February 1st. And it's still going up on mobile by 0.2% more kilobytes than last month. So again, it sounds kind of small, but over time it continues to grow. So just pointing that out, feel free to check it out. It's kind of a cool tool, the HTTP archive. So how does this actually apply to you individually? Some of you may be aware, but I did want to flag again the Lighthouse tools that are built into Chrome. So if you enter the developer view window, you can run some audits, part of a tool called Lighthouse, and get some scores back, both on actual performance and speed, but important other things like accessibility, general best practices. It has some really actionable stuff in here. So I would encourage you or your developer teams to definitely make sure that you've checked this out, at least on your own sites. And the other aspect of this that you can look at is, so the Lighthouse that I just showed you is really measuring locally, like the site loads within the browser and it measures it as it loads. The other thing you can look at is kind of aggregate data around what people are experiencing on their own browsers. So rather than testing it on your side, you can see what other people have experienced. And so Google released a couple of years ago the Chrome User Experience Report, or CRUX data. And basically this measures real-world performance across all different kinds of users who are using Chrome. So while it is a snapshot that does not include other browsers, because obviously we don't have that data at Google, it is an interesting way to kind of look at how your site is being experienced by people who are actually out in the world and not just you testing it on your own machine. So the way to easily access this for anybody here now is to go to the PageSpeed Insights on the developers page on Google. If you just Google PageSpeed Insights, that's generally the easiest way to get there. And it will give you a readout, you can see in this example, that gives you some overall scores, but then also has a page load distribution graph. And I will show you. So the main way to read this is across the third slowest, middle grade, and fastest sites, what on average are people experiencing on your site? So in this case, and I won't go into the details around what first contentful paint means and DOM content loaded, some of you may know. But on average, 52% of people are experiencing a site load that is qualifying as fast, meaning in the fastest top third. So that's not bad, but there's still some room for growth here. So this is kind of probably a middling-ish site, but it's an interesting way to, again, look at the data around what your users are actually experiencing across the web, not just on your own kind of local tests. So all of this to say that slow pages and performance issues generally are not so much of a mystery. Like if you actually dig and try to figure out like, why is my site slow, or what can we do to make it faster, you can usually find things. So there are tools that we have available. There are other tools, out there that, are even beyond Google. The thing I want to call out again is it's really, I would argue, a mentality shift or a focus and priority conversation, not so much a I don't know what's going on conversation. So with all of that in mind, that's kind of the backstory to what I want to talk a little bit more about is AMP in general. And some of you may have heard me talk about AMP. You may have heard some of the other folks at Google or otherwise talk about AMP. And I want to distinguish a little bit between what myself and what Ben, who is coming up to talk later, are going to talk about. I want to talk more about the project as a whole. Where are we? What are we doing? How far in this journey are we? What's coming up next? And Ben is actually going to dig into a little bit more of the technical details, tell you about some of the nitty-gritty things you can do with AMP, with some of the changes and improvements that have been made over the last year or so. So with that, the way we see AMP, and I use this picture to be a little bit overly simplistic, but in a world of the web where you can do all kinds of things, like I said, the web is what you make of it, we like to think that AMP really helps define this kind of well-lit path. So with a well-lit path, it actually helps keep you out of the weeds of some of the things that you can do that are going to negatively impact either user experience, speed, potentially ad performance, all those different types of things. And so that's how we view it. I think some people think that, AMP, especially from the Google perspective, is trying to do nefarious things with the web, or that we are forcing people to use it. Like, we really do not see it that way internally. I can vouch for that. We really do see it as positioning a way to get to a performant page that is designed to be relatively easy. The other way to look at it is to look at it as a toolkit to build pages kind of with these building blocks that are essentially guaranteed to provide a positive user experience and be fast on the web. So some of you probably know kind of the details around actually how AMP more specifically works. These are some of the AMP components that are made in HTML, and the number of these is only growing. Even since I spoke last, there's I forget what the latest count is, but there's a ton of AMP components, and each of these is basically a building block or a tool that allows you to create different things on a page. And Ben will talk a little bit more about how some of these things come together and some of the latest ones, but just kind of giving you a sense of actually how AMP works. And then the last thing I'll say, and I won't go really any more technical than this, is for anybody who maybe isn't familiar with AMP, I guess I should have taken a poll at the beginning. Has anyone not heard of it? It's totally fine. I just want to make sure. Okay, we got one. So most people have heard of it. I guess I'm maybe doing my job. But there's really three components here. And the thing that I want to call out that's slightly different that we've been telling people that I think maybe makes it click for them in a little different way. Outside of saying AMP is made up of HTML, there's a JavaScript library, there's the caching that happens either on Google or some of the other platforms. if you think of AMP almost like a service, it kind of, for me, makes it a little bit clearer around what it actually can do for you. The AMP JavaScript library is maintained by open source contributors who, many of which work at Google, but also work at various companies. We now actually have a governance board that includes people from Microsoft, Twitter, Pinterest. So it's a formally organized project that is not just Google. And in the JavaScript library, it basically every week updates to stay ahead of any kind of performance issues and is rigorously tested. So if you imagine it almost like as a service for your website that is going to ensure that you're going to get that performance if you utilize it, sometimes that thinking like helps people understand a little bit better what we're kind of up to or why we think this is something that can be useful. So yes, it is built on AMP HTML, and yes, Google caches it in order to serve it even faster when you're linking out from the search engine. But really, if you think about the JavaScript library basically being a team of web performance engineers that are working for you for free, that is kind of a different way, and I think some people have found success in trying to position it either to their developer teams as such or just understand it themselves. Practically, though, I want to highlight again that AMP is not a way to strip down your pages and make them super basic and boring and like remove all your branding. All of these are AMP pages. I highlight e-commerce examples because actually they tend to be the best at implementing things that like look really amazing and rich because you can. Obviously, you can do the same as a publisher. Vox is on the end there, but I think I really want to highlight and continue to like hit the hammer over and over again that AMP is not designed to make your pages overly simplistic and boring because it's totally capable of doing full e-commerce type setups if that's even what you wanted to build. The one in particular that I like to highlight is AliExpress, who you can use some of these components to build essentially a full shopping cart experience, which you don't necessarily need to build as publishers potentially, but again, is important to note that it's completely capable of this. And they've seen really, really good success actually with their completely AMP site. So it not only is AMP on mobile or has an AMP version, as some of you may use, but it is their entire mobile website. So there's not like a paired non-AMP version of the page. That's just it. So again, it really underscores what you can do with it. A publisher example of this is Tasty, which is part of the BuzzFeed family. Their site is built completely with AMP. There's no canonical version or non-canonical. This is just AMP across desktop and mobile. It's completely responsive. I think it looks pretty great, and it works super well for them. So again, just highlighting what you can do and trying to bust some of those myths that it is this scaled down version of the web. So with that, I kind of want to speed through to some of the other updates that we're making and some of the new things because, again, I don't want to reiterate things you may already know. AMP Stories is something that we introduced last year at the AMP conference. And basically what we've seen, and apologies for Google Slides making these like not as smooth. I promise they actually look even better on your actual phone. But the story format has really exploded per se across users consuming content. I think most people generally agree with this, whether it's through Snapchat or Instagram or other types of experiences. And what the AMP project saw, and in keeping with our vision of trying to build a user-first web and really empower the web experience, is that you can create this type of stuff on the web. Like, it's not impossible, but it is kind of challenging. If you were to go out and try to build a full screen mobile experience that's tappable with audio and transitions and animations, it takes a lot of work. So what we thought is, in the same way that we've got the JavaScript library that helps continue to keep your normal pages up to snuff and really speedy, we can provide kind of a framework or a library to create these full screen tappable experiences on mobile. So we're actually very excited about the potential for this. And there's been some early publishers who have experimented with this, and we've made a lot of iterative changes. So it may seem even like, oh, I heard about that a while ago. I'm not sure what they're doing. Like, we are very actively building this. And You actually will hear a little bit more about this in about a month. Our next annual conference is in April, and we're going to share kind of like all of the latest things that we've done with this format. So this is more of a stay tuned, but I think we're seeing a lot of really interesting content that is, taking advantage of this. That you get the distribution of the web, and it completely lives on your site, so you're not uploading it to a third-party platform, but you're providing your users with a way to engage in content that they may not have been able to, experience on a website before. So the last thing I'll say about AMP stories, or actually second to last, is that, again, they are completely what you make of them. So we've seen some people take this and make slideshows with it because that is something you can do. We're not saying that you shouldn't do that necessarily, but it really, I think, undersells what it's capable of. And so I just want to, again, highlight that there is a lot you can do with this format, and people have started to really play around with it, but it should be something that hopefully provides a framework for super engaging experiences, not necessarily just like tapping through still images, or at least I think that's the equivalent of a very boring AMP page that may have existed 3 years ago. So with that, I will say that we have more templates coming as well. So this is going to be up on our site here very shortly, and this will be something that you can like download yourself, just completely change how you want and experiment and play around, because we do want to make stuff super easy with this. The other thing you'll hear, and it's actually things are happening so fast that I didn't even get permission to kind of share the latest on some of these, but you'll hear in the next month at our event what all the full range of tools that have kind of popped up to support creation of AMP stories, because there's actually 5 or 6 now that are pretty good that are out there. So all I can really say at this point is like go search for some if you're curious, but they are starting to get out there, including one through WordPress, which we're personally like excited about because of our recent work with them. So that's the latest on AMP stories that I wanted to share. And the other thing is that we have full documentation if your developers want to check it out on our website. So do look into that. The other thing that I wanted to highlight in the last little bit of time I have is AMP for email, which, again, I feel like I am, when Tyler asked me to come up here or to speak, I was like, I'm really excited. I love this event, and I think it's like the perfect audience for so many of the things that I like talking about. But the timing, like we have so many announcements and things that are coming very shortly, and I wish I could share more on some of this, but I promise you, stay very closely tuned, between now and our conference in April. Yeah, I know, right? I wish. But AMP for email is something that we also announced last year that I think, for me personally, and I know you all are publishers, so you're often focused on your websites, but likely some of you have newsletters or use that as an engagement mechanism. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what people do with this. It, in a way, and don't maybe quote me on this, but really even changes the paradigm for what email is. And it basically allows you to enable dynamic and interactive content from within an email client. So you can see an example here. I think this is an invite of some sort where you can respond directly in the email. And the idea here is that if it shows the other people that are attending, each time you open the email, it will refresh with the latest information on who has already RSVP'd. So you can imagine all kinds of use cases for this, whether it's the latest weather widget, whether it's the latest headlines, or maybe you're able to like pin things or save things to an account you have, or all kinds of things, like I said, that I think people are going to build with this, and we're super excited to see where it goes. The other example I have is Pinterest, which is a little bit even more like dynamic in terms of like being able to open up panels from within the email, pin things into different parts of your account. So again, stay very closely tuned for this, and happy to answer questions about this, because I know sometimes people, it takes a minute to really like digest what is all involved here. But again, built with AMP HTML, and I think it really fits in our vision that you'll see it's more than just these simplistic pages that are super fast. We're really trying to bring the best of the web to everyone and make it easy in kind of this way that I would argue only the AMP project at the moment can do. So this is coming. Again, stay tuned. I specifically, again, will highlight the conference we have. It's going to be in Tokyo this year. Anyone who is interested in coming, please do check out our website to RSVP. We have all kinds of talks. It's going to be very developer heavy. So if you have a technical team that is interested, feel free to RSVP. Also, we are streaming and recording and documenting all of the talks, and we'll have blog posts, so you won't feel left out if you aren't able to make it over to Tokyo. But again, we're very excited. I think there's going to be a lot of news, announcements, things. Like I said, if this event had just been a month later, I would have so much more cool things to share. But we are kind of making sure that all the final touches are done on stuff before we kind of get it out. The last thing is also, this is going to be the first time that the new governance model for the AMP project, which I mentioned includes companies like Microsoft, Pinterest, others, are going to do some panels. And so we're really excited to kind of showcase all of the different kind of visions that people have, or at least the viewpoints on which now are formally incorporated into the leadership and direction of the project. Because it's always been our vision, and I think we were candidly a little slow to execute it, that it wouldn't just be a Google project. I think Google felt like we could staff and help create and spearhead something like this, but at the same time, it really only succeeds when other people are involved. So we're very excited to have these people sign on from these various companies across the internet, and to have that kind of structure really take hold. So that's coming. Stay tuned. So the last thing I will now mention then, to kind of close this out, is like, where can you go to get started? And in the past, I've kind of said like, oh, there's documentation or things like that, and I will get to that. But one thing in particular that I wanted to highlight is WordPress. And I know Ben is going to talk a little bit more about this in depth, but I think a lot of, to be, again, candid, the misconceptions about AMP came about because of the original WordPress plugin. If anybody had used it or had seen it, it really did strip out all of the like theming and styling that you had on your WordPress page, and it just created this AMP version that candidly was not great. But it did create a lot of AMP pages, so it was a trade-off at the time. But I think that, in hindsight, I'm not sure actually how helpful that was in terms of showing what is possible. That is finally not really the case anymore. So in December, we helped release the version 1.0 of the plugin for WordPress. And this is much more capable. So not only does it do the standard paired approach, in which you can do much more custom styling, etc. You can actually do what I believe they call in the plugin native AMP, which means your WordPress site can be built entirely with AMP across desktop and mobile using the plugin, and it can look great. I've played around with this a little bit, and I think it's super powerful. They're continuing to work on it and refine it, but it's miles ahead of what it used to be. It actually will even go through, and if you want to utilize it, it will tell you all of the potential issues it has when it goes to convert your site over. So you can see, oh, I may need to replace this with a specific AMP component, or maybe this other plugin like has some compatibility issues, and you can see if that's solvable for you. But it's still a developer tool, but it's much more, I think, either intuitive or helpful and resourceful in terms of if you wanted to utilize it. So I wanted to highlight that. Ben will actually show you how it works a little bit later today. The other thing then is, I used to get up here and say, we have these 3 websites, ampproject.org, ampstart.com, AMP by example, which all do still exist at the moment. But I don't know if anybody caught my earlier slide that said, check out the documentation on amp.dev. Because ant.dev exists, which is a brand new site that we actually just put up a couple weeks ago. And it's in kind of testing beta phase now, so both the original ampproject.org and this exist. But encourage you to go check it out, because it has much more completely filled out pages on things like stories. AMP for email will soon be much more fully baked. And it's got some new examples, templates, things you can download. So we're actually very excited to get this out in the world. I say this also, we have not actually announced this at all. So this is a little bit of an insider info. It is public, like you can go there and you can talk about it, but I was excited to be able to share this at this event because we're kind of asking for early feedback from people who we know like will be a valuable source of information for us. So we have not said anything about this. So feel free to be empowered with that. You get a little bit of a sneak preview. Hopefully you're excited as I am. But check this out. In the coming month or so, we will start to set up a redirect strategy so that we will move completely to this domain, which we hope is a little bit simpler. It combines all three websites' content. So no longer, if you're a developer or you're looking for templates, do you have to go to different domains. One's a .com, one's a .org. It was kind of confusing. Now we're all in one home, and we feel pretty good about it. So check it out. Give us feedback. I'm very excited. And in terms of giving feedback, we are all over the place, I guess is what I'm saying, is you can talk to us on Twitter. You can send us an email. I think the alias is listed on our website. Definitely on GitHub is where most of the technical discussion happens. I don't think there's a Slack logo up here, but we do have a Slack channel as well. Please talk to us. Find me or Ben later. I know he's also on the panel, so definitely ask him questions. But we're really excited to continue to work with all of you. AMP is not going away, and we're just as committed to really making it something that helps people get the best out of the web, and that is certainly our vision. So with that, I will leave you and say, I don't really care if you choose AMP. I hope I've maybe busted some myths or made it clear like what it's actually all about and what we're up to. But really at the end of the day, again, my message and what I care about and what kind of gets me excited to do my job is to make the web a better place for users. So leave you with that. Hopefully that you will go back and make sure that your site is the best it can be. That would make me so happy. So thank you and enjoy the rest of today.